AI systems and the platform developers rely on. AI is now part of the foundational infrastructure for the global digital economy. Within these shifting environments, middle powers such as Malaysia face both constraints and strategic opportunities. With that, it's an honor to have Dr. Chee and Miss Farlina with us today. Prof. Dr. Seng is a professor at UC Malaya, leading a research in computer vision and machine learning. Several published works at top AI conferences such as New IPS, CVPR, IJCAI, and EMNT. Ms. Farlina has been involved in crafting various dialogues and forums on cybersecurity, technology policy, and digital governance. Her research focus is on cyber stability, Malaysia's national interest in emerging technologies, as well as peaceful and meaningful use of cyber and digital tools. She has facilitated workshops on cyber norms and chaired the CSCAP study group on international law and cyberspace. She was formerly an analyst in the Foreign Policy and Security Studies program and currently provides support for the Institute Radicalization and Malaysia's Korea activities. Without further ado, we will start with providing the context. AI infrastructure, including cloud computing, AI models, and data center, is increasingly controlled by a small number of global technology companies. This raises questions not just about the economic dependency, but also about cybersecurity risks, data sovereignty, infrastructure resilience, and national digital control, especially for countries that rely heavily on foreign cloud and AI providers. We saw that EU European leaders have discussed the possibility for their push to reduce the reliance on big American tech firms like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft for cloud computing, and for financial services like MasterCard and Visa for payment systems. Ms. Farlina would like to hear your thoughts at a technical level. What does it usually mean when our data and AI systems are running on infrastructure owned by foreign companies? Who ultimately has control over the access, security, and continuity?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Whitman, for the question and actually for having me for this conversation this evening. I think the topic is actually very timely and also something that we see changes and shifts every single day. But I suppose to get to the question that you actually asked, in regards to the infrastructure or the data infrastructure that's actually owned by foreign companies, what does that actually technically mean for us, the people or the users who are actually using it? So I think the way that I actually look at it, there are actually a few things to consider, or actually two specific things to consider. The location of some of these infrastructure and actually where it is headquartered, because the location you actually usually means the jurisdiction that it actually answers to. While with the headquarters, this actually can mean that there are certain there can be certain extra territorial laws that can actually apply to it. So just to put it in, I guess, in more explicit terms, let's say if the data center is actually located in Malaysia, then it can actually it will actually have to be registered, I think, as a cloud service provider under NCMC. It will actually come under the PDPA as part of the infrastructure, as part of the data processing as part of the data processing infrastructure. So there are actually parts of the laws that would be actually applicable if it's actually in Malaysia. But when you're actually looking at extraterritorial laws, you actually have certain things like US Cloud Act, for instance, that actually that requires for certain types of information to actually be shared with the US government, or actually China cybersecurity laws that actually requires for if it's actually based in China, then there's the possibility that should there be an investigation or something that requires the government, the Chinese government to actually access the information, it is actually located, it's stated in the law that they are these companies, these parties are actually required to share the information with the respective governments. So that's actually some of the considerations I think we usually have to think about when we think about data infrastructure. I think, but something that is interesting when, because I think the question also looks at who has control over access, the security, and the continuity. And I think that last bit about continuity is actually quite interesting because if you actually have a service, would there be anything that actually state that mandates it's necessary for the service provider to actually continuously provide the service if actually anything happens? And this is actually usually supposed to come under, say, the reason why you actually get licensed by MCMC, so the MCMC make sure you actually do your job. So for instance, your telco service providers and things like that would actually come under some of the MCMC regulations. So because of that, you actually have to make sure that you do your job quite well. And I think that's the reason why you actually get licensed. So I think just in a way of actually putting it out there, I do hope that's actually a bit clearer.
Chan, if you have anything to add on, and from a cybersecurity and infrastructure resilience standpoint, what would digital sovereignty realistically look like for Malaysia? Yeah, Prof. Chan,
Okay.
and Miss Farlina, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wamint. I think just slightly to add on what Farlina has mentioned is that honestly, I mean, at a technical level, don't get into a false impression is that running AI system on a foreign-owned infrastructure means that we try to isolate this giant company, because I would say is that this global or this foreign-owned infrastructure, I mean, is important as well, because I mean, it helps not just us, I think the country to look at the whole large scale of implementation. But what we are really wants to have is that at technical level, if we're going to run AI system on this foreign-owned infrastructure, it means that the government or some authority needs to come out with some kind of policies where should be used or where should not be used, so that if anything goes beyond our control, I mean, what can we do, or how can governments understand the risk properly? I think this is where the missing part, because a lot of people always think that sovereignty, that is your second question over here, is interpreted as a technological isolation. For me, no. Yes, we should have some sovereignty, but I would say that on those very important pillars, for example, military, health, finance, civil service, I think these pillars, we need to have sovereignty because it's about the national security of the country. But other than that, I would say like entertainment, it doesn't need to have this kind of sovereignty. So for me, as a message is that this kind of international cloud platforms is important because they will continue to play a very important role in providing us the scalability as well as innovations. So the whole idea of digital sovereignty or over here is that it's not to replace these global players, but relatively is that how Malaysia or government of Malaysia can ensure that we have a good strategy capabilities, regulatory control, and as well as some cybersecurity kind of expertise between this national ecosystem. I think this is relatively more important that says that no, we're not going to allow you to come in and it's just Malaysia. Yeah.
I think it's okay for me to access. So I completely agree with Professor Chan. I mean, it's like in regards to sovereignty, I think the key word is definitely for me control as well. Because I think that is the challenge when you have data flows that's actually going across borders, cloud computing that's actually happening across different types of the entire architecture, like you actually have it in a different country, or you actually have it on edge, you have it on your device. Like, where is it going? What is it doing? And I think the challenge is sometimes the scenario that we think is about what happens when things go wrong, and what do you actually need to do for the government? What does the government need to do to actually ensure that that certain safety practices or security practices are actually kept to a high level? So because of that, when we actually look at sovereignty, while some countries may actually have the interpretation of sovereignty as in like end-to-end indigenous, everything has to be end-to-end indigenous, like everything has to be built, because some, to a certain extent, it depends on how you actually quantify risk. Because if your risk is that you're worried in the future that you may actually not get access to certain semiconductors, so then your risk is actually availability of some of these components of the architecture that you hope to actually ensure your nation has. So because of that, that's why when you actually look at the entire notion of sovereignty, you actually think, oh, I have to build it myself. Because if anything goes wrong, then at least I can build it myself. Like if there's actually a war that happens on my own soil, then I'm not depending on another country to actually produce like this minimum amount of chips or something like that. So that's actually some of the mindsets that I think different countries go through. But I think from a very to a certain extent, Malaysia can have a very practical point of view when it comes to sovereignty. I think we want to troubleshoot when things go wrong. So then that means if something happens when you use AI, you actually want to be able to in to be express, I suppose, that there is something that's actually wrong with the platform. If it's actually whether it's actually a domestic player that's running the platform, or whether it's an international player that's actually running the platform. So I think that looks at the base word of sovereignty, which is actually governance, like governing your own country. So I think in that sense, it's a very it can be very different, I think, on how countries actually interpret it.
It's indeed a very interesting perspective of how we define on the digital sovereignty, and to what extent of like as Prof Chan mentioned just now, and he said that like digital sovereignty, it is not like an isolation, and also what Miss Farlina said in um addressing questions to boost in scenarios such as political complications or attacks. Is it technically possible for access to cloud systems, AI tools, or infrastructure to be restricted? How critic is the risk? What extent the digital
So I think Wenming's line is kind of pretty bad in a way. Just give me a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me help to repeat these questions. To ensure that we have a smooth running of the forum itself. So just give me a second if I would help to get her in that case.
I think I'm back. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the smoothness of the forum purposes, can you just shut down your video?
For now, I've already changed the Wi-Fi, so yeah, I believe that it is much better now.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, and to add on just now, like it is a very interesting perspective from both speakers. Like from Prof Chan talking about digital sovereignty is not only limited, like isolated for the country itself. Also, from Miss Farlina sharing about in geopolitical conflicts and cyber attacks. So in such scenarios such as technology sanctions, geopolitical conflict, and is it technically possible for access to cloud systems, AI tools, or critical infrastructure to be restricted or disrupted? And how realistic is the risk, and how to what extent the risk expand in terms of the digital sovereignty?
Okay, I would say that technical speaking, yes. I mean, if you have a geopolitical conflict, if someone wants to shut you down, I mean, it could, all right. But I would say that if you look at the whole modern cloud platform that we have, eventually it's been operate into a centralized kind of identity. So yes, it's possible. But in extreme cases, I think like geopolitical tension that we experience. And we also have seen that certain access of certain country to certain technologies has been restricted of this. I think there's no doubt about that. But I would say is that for most country, rather than worried about this kind of disruptions, I would say that why not do like what I mentioned just now, and Farlina also mentions, is like your risk diversification or your risk mitigations. I mean, if they're going to shut you down, I mean, what is your contingency plan between it? Because I think no one's were able to guarantee this kind of continuous services. I mean, even though you look at our electricity, I mean, if one station down, you still have another stations that gonna come in. So it's always about triangulation. So as long as I would say that you'll be able to understand the risk of it, and you have a contingency plans or in plan, I would say that regardless, I mean, what geopolitical tensions are happening, your impact is almost minimum. But if the whole world is impacted, then I mean, forget about it. I mean, it's not just about you yourself, but it's the whole world. So this is what I see, that rather than worry about the geopolitical conflict itself, which is relatively random and unknown, I'll rather look at what is my risk diversifications that I could do to ensure that I still able to provide the best services to my people or even to my clients. Yeah. Paulina?
Yes, I think I agree. I think I definitely agree with the conclusion. Like redundancy is actually quite important in this space. But I actually also want to add, I think, some context to some of the question. And it is actually very, very likely. I mean, you can actually see it in Ukraine. You can actually see it in Ukraine on in some parts only because a lot of your critical infrastructure is actually interlinked. And I think also that means that your data can actually also flow through it is actually it's transboundary. And I think for a certain extent, for critical infrastructure examples, I think you can actually take a look at if you have a data center, your government's data center, for instance, if it's actually bombed, like then you actually have to one way or another, the government is actually, if it digitalizes, it's actually going to have to learn how to run a platform in areas of conflict. So you actually have to create redundancy in your data centers so that you can actually ensure continuity to offer the services that you need to for your people. Um, the second part would be other types of critical infrastructure that's interlinked, is like, say, your electricity and things like that. Like if you actually look at one part that's actually taken out, you can actually affect like different parts. Another one I think that is quite interesting is the example of Starlink. I think in this might be Starlink in Myanmar, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like you can there can be requests for services to be terminated under certain circumstances, and it's actually due to political pressure. And this is so on one hand, you actually have high conflict, which is actually obviously you have to think about what to do, and then you actually have to think about redundancy. But on the other hand, you actually have an environment where due to certain circumstances and political pressures, that's why the businesses are actually not able to run their services. So I think the these two scenarios can can present that the type of risk if you actually do have all these other service providers in the country, and if they are actually required to abide by whatever types of regulations where they are headquartered, that is actually where they're headquartered. So this goes also to the idea that if your data center is actually located where the jurisdiction is actually, that's the instruction, then that's the instruction. If the headquarters and it comes with extraterritorial types of jurisdiction, then they actually would have to abide by that as well. But some things to also consider is that some of the tech companies actually do have to think about the constituencies that they're serving. So then that means they actually do have the market. If it's the domestic market or the Malaysian market, it is actually to their own credit. They actually have to service the Malaysian market. So because of that, to balance out the political pressure is actually the lobby that comes from the private sector itself to actually see and actually also the types of mechanisms that's available in the countries that they're in, that has to sign a contract for the services to be continuous. So there are actually many different factors. So and I think the environment, in terms of like the question, is definitely very likely if somebody wants, if it's actually geopolitical conflict, if it's actually war like that, there's a possibility that services will actually be disrupted, and that that's a highly likely scenario actually. But in a day-to-day environment, like if it's actually for sanctions and other types of pressures, you can actually have different leverages, although it may take time, like for certain leverages to actually kick in.
Thank you so much for the sharing and also giving so much examples of, and I believe it is very clear right now. And we will move on to the geopolitical side. And the Trump administration approved exports of NVIDIA's second most powerful AI chips, the H200 AI chips, to China, but only under strict conditions. And this includes third-party verification of the chip's technical capabilities, limits on export volumes relative to domestic supply, and requirements that the chip not used for military purpose. With such conditions, how might such restrictions and conditional approval on advanced AI chips such as NVIDIA's H200 affect China's AI development in the short term and long term?
Okay, as usual, I'll go first. Farlina, sorry. Okay, I'll say yes. I mean, if you do a control, managed access rather than full denial, yes, I mean, they might have a short-term impact of how, I mean, Chinese AI firm are able to use this thing. But I would like to share to everyone is that this kind of chip controls is not like an on-off switch. It's just a break. Yeah, I mean, when I say break, what does it mean? It means that for me, technological sanction is just I'll interpret as a tools that buying times. Okay, so because it's not a permanent solution, I mean, yes, you might have slowed me down, okay, by limiting access to this H200, but still at the same time, then I would need to enrich my own local ecosystem to be there. So it means that yes, you can control me, but at the same time, you also indirectly strengthen the incentive for domestic substitutions. And we already see firms like Huawei, they come up with the Accent chips. On that, yes, of course, at the moment, is not up to NVIDIA par yet, but as time goes by, then it will depend on how the Chinese government, as the Chinese AI firm, how much time they need to buy before that they can reach to the level of this. So that's why it's just a matter of time, because technology sanction is just, or hardware sanction is just one part of it. The whole ecosystem still runs. I mean, talent, software, everything is still there. So if you can stop one thing, but it doesn't really stop at stop. For me, it's just a buying time kind of things. And it also makes Chinese much eager and also show to the rest of the world is that today is me, tomorrow might be you. So you need to get ready for this kind of possibility. So that's why I will not say that it will have a long-term effect. Short-term, yes.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. And I think the thing that has to be significant is that I think to a certain extent, like trust was actually broken. Like when the initial export controls actually kicked in, and also the pressures that was placed on, say, ASML and actually on Japan to actually to actually try and slow down China's development of the chips. I think it showed that there was there that there needs to be a plan. China actually needs a plan for them to actually pursue the digital ambitions that they actually have, especially if they actually rely on external chips. And I think at this end, after several rounds of the export controls, as we've had like a couple of years where they actually just continuously updated the different types of chips that is limited and that couldn't actually be exported. Um, and the space actually becomes a lot smaller for there to actually be a lot of transfers. I think it became a survival strategy for China to actually pursue their own chips. So I think to a certain extent, like the desire for the desire for the H200s to actually penetrate China and I guess have a kind of like a fighting chance and things like that, it might actually be possible, as Professor Chan actually said in the short term, but I think in the long term, it's definitely a certain trust has actually been broken, and I think that the plan is actually for there to be the indigenous chips.
Yeah, and that is a very distinct perspective. And as we see, like while China is still expanding its domestic AI ecosystem, its platform still lag behind the leading US AI services in terms of the global scale and user adoption. To take an example, like China's the DeepSeek website visit in January reached like 298.3 million like there is a decrease from December, and as for now, OpenAI still lead. And even though China is growing, its the domestic AI ecosystem, its platform still has far fewer global users than those leading AI services. In this context, how would you gauge the effectiveness of China's effort in building the alternative AI ecosystem, or perhaps you can or like how long do you think that have to take in order to grow in a larger scale, or has the possibility to surpass the leading countries?
Yeah, so yeah,
You can start it.
I've asked Professor. No, I would actually ask Professor Chan for his like technical point of view because I think I have a view that's probably not so technical. So
Yeah. I'll do it very quickly. I'll say that it's not I mean, for me, it's not comparable in this, because I think their focus point is totally different. I mean, companies like OpenAI, they are aiming for global skills. Okay, they're looking at the open international market, but I would say Chinese, they are readily built for their own domestic ecosystem, because they do have enough people to service. So eventually, if you're looking at the whole thing, especially if you have used DeepSeek, GLM, Kimi, all these latest Chinese technology, you can see that most of the emphasis is on the Chinese ecosystem, rather than is the open international. So they don't, not say they don't bother, but the market is totally different for them. So and this kind, but it also means that in global manner, they are just targeting people that is much more related to Asian culture or Chinese culture in particular. So that's why I would say that is the targets is a bit different. So I totally agree with you. What means is that yes, in current moments, if you look at a DeepSeek or wherever they're coming from China, they are slightly less competitive in terms of global platform dominance, as you say. But you can see that the adoption locally and is and economically, you can see that the size is almost very similar to what OpenAI or Gemini that has been experienced globally. So in terms of user, it might be less, but if you look at financially, economically, I would say that they are very equivalent, the same. Yeah. Farlina?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, I so agree. I'm quite surprised that we had the same answer. So because it's like it's like looking at a competition where there's a race, right? And then you're actually looking at who's actually going to be seated on the podium, like number one, two, or three. But in this kind of situation, I think it is actually a bit difficult. No, it's less of a clearer answer that just because you actually do have, say, how many millions that's actually ahead of the other party, what does the market dominance actually mean? Because when we're actually looking at the purpose, the strategic purpose usually of market domination is the ability for it to shape standards. And I think that is if any party actually usually seeks market dominance, it's actually for that type of purpose and intention. But if we are actually looking at the entire space of governance for AI, or the types of AI that's actually being produced by China versus the US, like your closed models versus, like, say, your open source models and things like that. It's like these have different types of clientele who's actually interested in these types of models. And also the fact that you actually have the open AI actually probably being more appealing because of the fact that it's actually easily available and things like that. Maybe there are certain things that people will actually gravitate towards it for. That means that there's actually space in the market for actually both types of uh I think products. Um, but I think in that sense, when we actually try to understand strategic implications, if you're actually looking at whether your society is actually using more open AI or more DeepSeek and things like that, that's perhaps where you will have ideas of sovereignty actually kicking in, only because I would actually say that sometimes if you actually are looking at platform and platform governance and things like that, and you're actually about to actually use the platform, sometimes there are actually certain things that you as a country who's adopting these platforms, you may be a bit concerned about what's actually going on those platforms. And then the type of cooperation that you actually get from those platforms will actually determine actually how I think we would actually approach these types of services. So I think to a certain extent, to look at it in terms of alternatives may be a bit difficult, because I think sometimes the argument is like US China, but then sometimes if you actually look at the models itself, then you actually look at the ones that's open source, the ones who actually allow you more control over the weights versus the ones that's actually closed and proprietary. And that one actually may have different types of players in the space. And it really depends on what your risk appetite or your control appetite is when it comes to some of these models.
I see. And from a local context, how do you think Malaysia can benefit from such AI, the race between the US and China?
I would say that we're already benefiting.
In terms of the usage.
Yeah, I think we are already benefiting. From it. I mean, countries that are not say in between, but rather neutral on this technology, because at the end of the day, it always, adoptions or users is always about who give the best deal. Yes, you can say that you're gonna pro a certain part of the world, but when you go down to business, it's always who give you the best deals on the table, and that's reality check. I will say that the good thing about us as Malaysia is that if we are geopolitically neutral, eventually for us I would say that it's a strategic advantage, because countries they are looking for investments. Malaysia will be a very trusted entity, And if you're looking at certain area that we are good at, eventually, for example, semiconductors industry, and now we have a lot of hyperscaler data center or data or IDC in the country. I would say that people will look at us because as you are neutral and you have strong regulatory, if we do gonna have ones, and if we continue to develop have a proper line of talent development of this, I'll say that we will become a nice bridge for this whole ecosystem, rather that you've been forced to align or to exclusively to one part of it. So this is my point of view.
Yeah, I think so. There's an advantage and there's I think a disadvantage. And I think something that's about the advantage is, as Professor Chan actually painted, when it comes to our neutrality, like that's actually so valuable. Because to a certain extent, we are a partner that has to maintain our friendship with both nations because they're actually both very important to us. Um, but also at the same time, the disadvantage in this entire environment is that if there are alliances and proprietary alliances, like the Tech Silica, for instance, that's actually made for innovation and frontier technologies to be produced within closed circles, there's the possibility that Malaysia may not be at the front seat of those circles. But because we are actually also friends with many people who are actually in those same alliances on both sides, then that means that there might actually be certain types of peripheral activities that will actually take place in Malaysia anyways, because we actually have a very good industrial base or some of the foundations that's actually here, especially when it comes to semiconductors, for instance. The fact that we actually have been pursuing like the multimedia super corridor policies for a very long time. So we are not starting at ground zero from a lot of things. So that's where that means that to scale up or for certain seeds to actually be embedded in some of these newer AI economy or value chains is actually highly possible. So then that's where Malaysia is actually in a very good place. But if the stack alliances actually means that it can mean that there's actually a lot more scrutiny for the third party. It can also mean that there's also a lot more compliance for the third party. It can also mean that there are perhaps some activities that's like frontier activities that may not be distributed to the third party because there's concerns that you are actually going to be you are too neutral for this environment. So that's actually some of the downsides. But I think something that's interesting in the current arms race, and maybe because also you're actually looking at a supply chain that's very vulnerable, meaning that I think when Min actually painted earlier on, you only have, say, a couple of players who can actually produce the type of chips. You probably have a couple of players who is actually really producing the frontiers type of stuff. So there are only a couple of players actually doing this entire stack. And I think there are actually different countries who are actually also looking at this environment and actually are a bit concerned because perhaps with the current administration that you see in the US, you actually find that sometimes the expectations of allies can actually be higher than the expectations for adversaries. And I think in that sense, there is the concern that the type of alliance that you think is actually so secret may actually not be it may be shaken. So you may actually have to think about a third step. You may actually have to think about ideas on how to diversify this entire space, so that there would be more players or just enough players so that there is enough diversity for the resilience of the entire supply chain. And I think again that's where Malaysia may have the advantage because there are actually some of these foundational and there are some of these foundations that Malaysia has actually sowed, which can be grown, although investment is actually still required. Like you actually still need to build the talent, you still need to build the infrastructure around it and things like that. So that's some things to consider.
Malaysia is thanks for sharing and sharing about the Malaysia's strategic position due to its neutrality and also its foundation builds and semiconductor it is like Malaysia is ranked as the sixth largest semiconductor exporter globally, and especially in assembling, testing, and packaging. So moving on, and for the context of Malaysia's strategy, so as for the context, semiconductor are increasingly central for the national development. So, forming the backbone of modern digital and industrial economy, and although like Malaysia's ranking as the sixth largest semiconductor exporter, much of the Malaysia's semiconductor activity still remains concentrated in lower value segments of the supply chain, especially assembly, testing, and packaging, rather than the advanced chip design or fabrications. Given Malaysia's strong presence in the in the semiconductor ecosystem, what strategies do you think that can help the country to move into high value segments such as chip design, advanced packaging, and semiconductor R&D? If Miss Farlina would like to start first.
Yeah, thank you for volunteering me. Because I think to a certain extent there have been a few initiatives that's actually been done, at least in the past couple of years, focused on trying to instigate Malaysia's role, especially when it comes to design, like say the IC design parks. Um, and I think the challenge in some of the infrastructure is actually there, and I think the challenge is that the talent actually has to be grown. The research actually has to be done. The partnerships actually have to be formed towards specific goals. So I think it is actually very difficult to say how fast certain types of activities should be in this space. So I think it's very that's actually also where I would actually also appreciate, I think, the point of view of the technical community, because the fact that the IC design park is actually perhaps just a couple of years old, should that actually be a couple of years old where we should actually already see an output? Or should that actually be a couple of years where the output should be within the next few years? Like, is there a goal that actually looks at how it actually fits into this AI ecosystem? And I think the thing about the AI ecosystem, again, the value chain and the stacks, there's actually many opportunities. Having realistic goals on what you can actually form is actually quite important. Conducting R&D that's actually related, like for instance, there are certain types of chips that's being designed for it to be energy efficient, or certain types of algorithms that's actually written for it to be energy efficient. Because the problem you're trying to address is that some of your AI futures is actually going to be so draining for your energy. So you actually have to think about how to intervene at the hardware level as well as at the algorithmic levels. And are these actually the types of questions that we're actually pursuing? And when should we actually see the results? So I think I think some of the seeds are actually already there, but I think it's actually trying to galvanize the efforts so that it actually stays the course to a single direction. Because R&D is rarely ever a cycle that actually comes out in like 2 years. It's actually something that sometimes takes like 10 years. And I think the challenge of that is that Malaysia has had a history where even when we pursue R&D, if it doesn't commercialize, if it doesn't hit a certain breaking point, at one point, we actually would pull the plug when it comes to the funding, because we're so limited when it comes to the funding. So I think this is actually going to be our greatest challenge, that our dream will actually not be met if we actually don't pursue it like persistently, and we actually don't pursue it intelligently. So that's my point of view.
All right. Thank you, Farlina, for bringing this up. I think exactly as you said, talent pool. But I think that we need to be very realistic over here, like Farlina has mentioned. It's not about how many talents. I mean, on here, it's a talent depth that we need, because like you say, I mean, when we want to go to currently from our IC integrations and manufacturing, we want to move up to the higher value chain, which in IC design, so on and so forth. It's not something that's it just plug and play. and you can simply go to the street and pick 1 or 2 person. Okay, come and do so. So for me, sometimes my personal opinion is that the emphasis is slightly misleading in the sense that there's so many kind of short courses being introduced. I mean, yes, we need these short courses to enable everyone. But to be honest, to be really able to move to a much more higher level ecosystem, the depth is much more important. Where, like Farlina mentioned, investment in terms of R&D, it is very, very crucial, and also must be somehow patient onto it, because whatever that you develop now, like Farlina mentions that chip design, how can you design a energy efficient chip for the moment? I mean, this coding is not easy. It would take at least years to do so, and then another few more years to be acceptable by the markets. Because when you do this research, even though it works, but in terms of production-wise, it's still quite costly because of the semiconductor cost, we name it, of that. So I think that is where this is very important, that we should start now and then looking at talent depth rather than talent capacity that we always emphasize. I mean, I always listen to regardless from which perspectives, that, oh, we're gonna develop another 5,000 talents. I mean, no. If you want to move up the value chain, you just need to develop 50 talents. And that 50 talents is your crucial. It's just like you go to a hospital. What you need is a specialist. You need a cardiac specialist. It doesn't need a lot of doctors on that. So that is the difference. If you really want, if you really have the desire for me to really move up to the high value chain, regardless in terms of semiconductors, software, or automation, I would say that it's about talent depth rather than the talent capacity. Yeah.
I see. So that's an interesting perspective saying about like it is like in terms of the talents, which do you think is the barriers that that limits the Malaysia's ability to move up to the high value semiconductor ecosystem? And while Malaysia is seeing rapid growth in data centers and cloud adoption, much of the underlying infrastructure is owned and operated by foreign hyperscalers. And this raises deeper questions about whether Malaysia is building genuine digital sovereignty or becoming structurally dependent on external infrastructure providers. So for Malaysia's technological security, which do you think is more critical, whether it is ownership of data or compute infrastructure or core technologies like chip and cloud platforms, which poses the greatest risk if left unaddressed? Prof. Chan, would you like to?
Uh, it's gonna be a very hard pick to be honest. I trained a model before. I would say that all these trees are equally important. I mean, if we don't have it, but if we really need to be prioritized, uh, probably I would say is that if I lose out, okay, because if compute power, is a security, because I would say that the data is always coming from yourself. Is your own data. So I'm not too worried about that. Okay. But if you lose control, or if you doesn't have enough of compute capability, which is, so then it will be very, very difficult for you to operate the AI in the country, because although, I mean, as I said, digital ecosystem or resilience we want is rely on data, compute, as well as the technologies, which is algorithm itself. But you can say data, I always can get it. Algorithm, there's so many open tools now available or in the market which you can take. But if you lose the compute, you doesn't have enough compute, I think that will be a relatively disaster. It means that you do have the roads built, but then you do have the so-called a petrol or EV charger ready, but you don't have the car. You don't have control of car. People doesn't want to sell you any car at all, or they put a sanction on the selling of the cars to you. You only can buy a 1000cc motorbikes or cars only. You can't. So that for me, if really need to choose, the technology gap is a compute, and this is also, you see, that is why US put a sanctions on the latest NVIDIA technologies like the Hopper series and the Blackwell series to China, in order somehow to get them to move quicker. So this for me, if I need to pick a choice, I will say that the ownership of the compute infrastructure is relatively important. And that is where, if you look at the side effect of it, is that if I have the compute control in the country, it all means that I will have enough talent to do the training. And if I have such a compute power in the country, I'm also able to attract investments to the country as well. So that's why, if I need to choose, I will say the compute. Yeah.
Thank you. I think actually, so I had a different answer, but after Professor Chan's answer, I think I have completely changed my mind. But but probably I will actually give the reason about the original answer that I had. So in the beginning, I think when I read like ownership or data, and I was actually thinking about AI, I was actually thinking about the necessity for you to actually have data that's actually quite localized, because meaning that you actually need local for it to actually be trained on something that is quite nuanced for your society, because then you actually have an output or a product that serves the community that's actually supposed to serve. And that's the point of actually having some of these services. So in that sense, that's actually where I actually initially thought. But I think when it comes to technology security, the argument for the capability, for it to actually have the capability domestically, is actually quite significant in a lot of ways. But I also agree that I think you actually need a combination of all, so that you can make sure that you are actually able to run the AI. I think just being able to run it, just actually being able to ensure that the services are actually not interrupted, you actually do need all the platforms. Although I think when it comes to the core technologies, as mentioned by like the chips and the cloud platforms, there are actually certain types of different types of contracts that you can actually get into for these type of things. So probably that's where I am at in my mindset.
Thank you so much. That's a very good perspective from both speakers. And we now move on to the Q&A. Participants, if you have any questions, feel free to post it here. Thank you so much for sharing. We will start off from some questions raised by the participants on the Google form, and one of them say that recently some analysts and investors they began warning about the potential AI bubble, and saying that AI investment and expectations are rising faster than the real economic return so far. I believe this is also something that Prof. Chan also mentioned just now. And do you think that this concern is valid, or do you think AI is still in an early stage of the long-term growth? And Miss Prof. Chan, you can.
Okay, I'll take that one in a quick way. Yes, I mean, a lot of people have claims that it's in a bubble, but I'll still say that AI is still quite very early in the so-called early in the infancy stage. Why I say so? Yes, you have seen a lot of this kind of marketing promotions out there on this in whatever social platform that you have. But if you really drill down to ask the people around you, how many of them use AI? My parents, none of my I mean both of my parents and in-law, no. Okay. You just need to fact check it. I will say that yes, a lot of people has been using so-called AI assistants now, mainly for chatting. Really has been in their core operations. So for me, core operation is totally different from a non-core operations. A lot of AI has been adopted in a very non-core operation, means that if the things fail, it won't affect the company at all. So you can see that a lot of this kind of AI system has been used as a chatbot, customer service. If it goes wrong, does not matter because humans always gives the wrong answer as well. So it does not matter. But in terms of cost-wise for companies, yes, because I can now just need to have one GPT behind me to substitute tens customers, callers that or telemarketers that I need to maintain. So this is where I think is, but I would say that from a technical point of view, there's still many things that need to be done. And we are at the stage of trust and safety. You can see that AI at the moment can grow so fast and have such a high value or bubble. I mean, if you look at the news just this morning, former Meta CTO Yan LeCun, he came out from Meta just I think a couple months ago, and he started his own company. Without doing anything, his name and his former title have valued his company at 3B. And they just raised 2B, near to 2B this morning as I know of. So yes, there's a lot of bubble on that, but why investor is still willing to do so because they just need to bet on one successful company, the returns will be enormous. And for me as a developer of some of this AI ecosystem, for us, very simple. Because at the moment, the policy is still relatively weak. So whenever we develop, I'll say that we will do first, apologize later.
I think so I guess to add to this, so because it's not to say that I'm actually a businessman, so my point of view may actually come from somebody who's actually trying to make sense of this entire AI bubble, because I think everybody always compares the AI bubble to like the dot-com boom and actually all the things that actually happened during the time of where some of the investments didn't actually result into the profits that you want, only because business models when it comes to software or when it comes to this new space is actually a bit difficult to quantify. So everybody keeps on talking about, okay, you sink in a lot of money, and then a lot of people are sinking a lot of money into these type of things. But then who's making the money? You know, where is the money actually, where are the returns actually coming from? Who's actually making the profit? So I think some of the challenges is then the larger question is the AI economy even working in this space? For instance, if you actually have the adoption, AI adoption actually happening, AI adoption actually happening also at the same time as there being losses or job displacements. So thinking about it from the point of view of an AI adopter country instead of say an AI developing country, you can actually see that maybe there are actually certain parts of the stack or certain parts of the value chain where you can actually gain, but it requires a realistic assessment of what you think you can actually gain. Because, for instance, if you actually adopt the AI, at a very at a very like layman level, you're supposed to actually have productivity gains for certain things. If you actually adopt like some of the AI for cybersecurity, for instance, it can actually help you with a lot of the work that you need to do. You do ChatGPT for stuff, it can actually help you free up your time for certain things. But also at the same time, that's the gains that you're actually supposed to get is actually from the time that's actually freed and the productivity gains that you get. But in the larger scale of things, if you actually also have a backdrop of like say job displacements and things like that, you're actually looking at the fact that you may actually be an AI adopting country, but then it's like you're AI adopting some of these technologies, that's actually not giving a lot of returns because of the job displacements and things and some of these other concerns. So that's actually where the government intervention actually has to be in. And I think that's actually also where we see the policies. There are like some of the policies like My Mahir and things like that in place to actually address some of these like problems. But it will be ongoing. I don't think it's actually early days. I think it's actually already days that you can tell if the AI economy is actually not going to work for the country. And if we're going to be an AI nation, we actually have to think about how to make it work.
Thanks for sharing, and especially like bringing in the issue of the job disruptions, and there is also another question from the participants. It is like about the recent, like the Department of War with Anthropic, like let's say with Anthropic currently suing the Department of War over its supply chain risk designation. We are seeing a first of its kind clash between corporate safety and national security mandates. Do you believe a private company has the First Amendment right to restrict how its AI speech is used by the military, or uh, does the government's need for AI supremacy override a developer's moral code? Mm.
I think a very interesting question. Truth be told, I actually haven't delved into like the deeper details on the suing. So I think some of this may actually be coming from what I think I actually understand from the landscape. So because usually we always expect that ethics and governance to actually be driven by governments. And or at least you actually expect your usual national AI governance and ethics guidelines is actually going to be driven by the governments, and then accountability is actually going to be from the government side. But also, but I think because the recent administration in the US, they actually decided, okay, this go fast and break things. It's like forget about all these ethical kind of guardrails that you actually have to consider. That was actually in place, I think, with the previous administration. And that's why currently you actually have the government going fast, breaking things. And then in this current situation, you actually have the private sector actually being the body that has to hold on to the ethical guidelines that they actually have internally. And I think in this case, there are there are two questions. One question is actually about the uh, the the private sector actually being like the body who is actually trying to drive ethics. Is that actually the environment that we actually want to see going forward? The second part is that because the private sector are actually tool makers, and then technically the tool makers are actually going to be employed by other folks who are actually using certain things, it's it will be very in a situation where you are not actually trying to stop those type of they are currently trying to stop the bodies because that's where the suing actually comes in. But in this situation where the tool is actually already out in the market and then you're actually trying to wheel it back without anything like a kill switch or anything like that, it's actually going to be difficult for you to determine who actually specifically holds the product that you have. So I think that's where it becomes a bit difficult to actually say like because in certain high threshold situations like uh terrorists actually using certain types of tools, those kind of things actually comes from certain mandates from the UN that says okay, the private sector actually should react in this way. That's why you should actually deny services of these people to actually utilize their services for any types of things, and for any type of nefarious activities. So in those type of situations, it's actually very clear. With in this one where it's actually against such a major government, I think it's actually a bit difficult to actually articulate like the way forward. So I don't really have a very good answer, only because you're actually looking at a government instead of like a non-state actor.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I've read the news. Okay, I mean, from a developer standpoint of view. So because I developed the model, I know the risk of the model that I can carry over if it has been misused by certain entity. I mean, as a developer, I honestly, personally support that. I mean, as a developer, you should have your social responsibility in this, that whatever you develop, how do you going to safeguard it to those are vulnerable to this kind of technology? So if you're able to proclaim and in a very upfront to say that my technology will enable these things, not to say that I explicitly develop it to do this thing, but if it will cause this kind of harmful or effect, I would rather put a shield on there to say that no, you should not use this for that. So I think this is what as a developer, I mean, I really so-called support this kind of initiative in the sense that you actually know what are you doing, and then how you're also able to protect those who are going to use your technology. So there is a scoping there, rather than you leave it open out there and let people to exploit it. So that's why by putting this kind of safe and trust into your AI model, I would say that it will make or ensures that, I mean, we're gonna have a much more peaceful a world, rather that you do not proclaim it in prior, and then it might lead to some disaster that you might not have thought of when you develop this kind of system. Yeah.
Mhm. Thanks for sharing. Or kind of agree with that, and sometimes it is of that from it is the priority of like the customers. We also have to think from their
Yeah, I think we just need to think. I mean, if you want to look at this thing, we just need to think back the Terminator movie, the first law. I mean, do not harm human. Just apply. I mean, the movie explicitly hard-coded these rules. But if you are honest developers or technology company, I think this is where this is always your first principle. Whatever you develop, it should not harm the mankind.
Yeah, I believe that this is also like the Anthropic's strategy in order to shape themselves as a very trusted company. And another question by the participants, and like with increasing use of the biometric and personal data in digital system, who should ultimately own and control this data? Is it the private companies, or is it like the governments? How it actually works? If Prof Chan, if you have any ideas about this.
I think Farlina, you want to go? I think you try to say something.
I because so I was actually still trying to formulate, I think, some of my thoughts. Like the because in some countries, I think they actually allow such control over data all the way at the user level. I think, for instance, in Estonia, you would actually be able to see how even the government actually uses your data, where the data is actually transferring from, who actually accesses your data. But this actually also comes from a back-end architecture that actually allows it to happen. For instance, like which government body actually holds which information, and then how that actually interacts with each other. So in this sense, when you're actually looking at some things like your biometric data, technically the user, that if I understand correctly, technically you should be the owner of your data, and the person and the companies that actually utilize your data, they're actually signing a contract. You're signing a contract with them for them to actually use your data for the purposes that they actually need to deliver the types of services that you actually want. I think that's supposed to be the basics of like your PDPA. Although I think in the current landscape, sometimes it's actually a bit difficult because I think platforms they don't platforms and the algorithms behind the platforms are actually not not singular. Like it's actually not only one thing happening at the same time. I mean, one thing happening at one time. There are actually many things that can actually happen at the same time. For instance, if you're actually supposed to sign up for the social media platform, if actually the under 16, if any under 16 kind of requirement actually kicks in and you have to actually give in your IC, will your IC actually be used for other parts of the of identification along the entire platform, for instance? So it's like the types of activities that you see being done with your data is actually not simple. And I think with AI, it's actually also not going to be very simple. So that's why the responsibility in this entire space will actually become quite difficult, especially if, let's say, I'm actually going to interact with ChatGPT. Let's do something simple, right? So ChatGPT, it actually takes the information that I actually put in, all that kind of stuff, and it actually infers with all this other stuff for other types of output later on. How does the ownership for that type of data actually come back to you as the person who actually initially is supposed to own these types of information? So I think those type of things are actually going to be a bit complicated and a bit difficult to actually try to trace. And I think that's where the landscape or the technological architecture actually has to be up to date so that there can be a lot that so that it can actually go back to the basics of, say, the user actually being the owners of the data themselves.
Yeah, I think I agree with Farlina in the sense that my data, I own it. So I should be you should be the governance of your own data. Of course, especially when I say that the data should be your own responsibility, it also means that I'm not sure to say that I'm going to lock my own data, I'm not going to share with everyone. But what as a user or as what I want to know is that where my data has been used. I think this is much more important point there, because at the moment we seems doesn't have a single clue that eventually where our data has been floating to. You might be very surprised that if there is such a transparency, your data might have been linked to the rest of the world. Even maybe out of this world as well, has been linked to Mars, Jupiter, or whatever. So at the moment, there is no transparency of the data. And that is where policy is very important to come in to somehow govern us, to say that, yes, if you are in certain level of security, we do need to inform the user when we try to use his or her data, especially if this is still with national security threats, so on and so forth. We do not need to inform you if we want to utilize this. But if it goes out to certain level, that's on your financial, your health, so on and so forth, I think I have the rights to inform or to let whoever wants to know about my health status on here, because my health say unless you are a certain prominent figure of the world, or else I would say that, I mean, why on earth that you want to use my data even for training an AI model? I should be part of it, that I want to know that you have been using my data to train an AI model, because did I agree in the very first place? That is the thing. So that's why there's not much policy on that, especially when we try to use software. If you see that whatever software that we intend to download, you have no choice that you need to agree with the terms and conditions. Once you disagree or you don't take, it simply means that you cannot install that software. So for me, indirectly, I have been forced to accept the terms. So this is where certain policy will need to come in to somehow relook on how this thing will benefit both parties. I know that certain protection is required, certain data to be used to train the model, but there should be somehow a balance in between, that it will be a win-win situation for both parties. But at the moment, it seems to me that from a user or from a humankind perspective, that we are the losing party.
Thank you so much. And another question from from Exo. They say he is asking, with the rise of OpenClaw and its ability to orchestrate the digital assembly lines, where specialized AI agents handle entire workflows from coding to project management. How do you see the role of human supervisor evolving? Are we heading toward a future where a 50% department is replaced by one manager and 100 open cloud agents? And what does that mean for the entry level career path in industry like finance and consulting?
Okay, I'll take this one very quickly. I have OpenClaw installed in my whatever devices on here. But after using it, honest opinion, perfect, marvelous. The things that it can do really amaze me and also help me a lot. But when I say that it helped me a lot, because I monitor it, I counter check it, I are in the whole ecosystem loops. Okay. But I also realize that if I'm not in the loops to somehow governance it, honestly, it's relatively scary, in the sense that it will make a decision or will do some things that doesn't make sense at all. So that's why I will say is that regardless in what kind of disciplines and how these kind of open cloud platforms are advanced, I'll also always say is that human in the loop of any AI system is very, very important. You will lose your humanity if you start to give out your own human rights to the machine. Because a lot of times when we make a decision, regardless in manufacturing, consultancy firm, medical, it's not just about data. There's also some sentiment on it. That is where the human touch comes in. If you start to lose this kind of human sentiment or human power into it, then I would say that it's not going to be very useful on here. Not so that's why I'm not to say that you should not use OpenClaw. You should, and I strongly encourage it as well. But you must be in the loop to know what you want, what do you expect, and does it give you the expectation that you want? If not, then you should be intervene the whole process and then guide it to that, rather that you just leave it to that. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna use my Telegram or WhatsApp. Just do this analysis for me, and then I'm gonna play golf. No, that will be a disaster.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for the question. I think also because sometimes I do think about like the future of the workforce, and I actually think about the fact that even currently there's a lot of services that is already being taken over by AI, or actually that you would actually request AI to do it. I was actually just reading an article about how do you actually ace an interview if you're actually interviewed by AI, what do you actually do. So there are certain things that will actually change the shape or the characteristics of the workforce. You actually will see more of a human machine workforce. And I think to a certain extent, that can mean a lot of things, I think, for the entry person. It can mean that your productivity or your performance would actually be compared to an AI. Would you actually match up or like, measure up to an AI? There could actually be already certain jobs that's not going to be available to you because you can actually it's actually a job that is already taken over or that's actually already relegated to the AI. So I think in this kind of landscape, it would be from the person who's actually running the entire enterprise. I'm assuming the thing that they would actually look for the most is actually productivity and actually just gains. If it's actually the business sector, you're actually just looking for the gains and you're actually just trying to uh, be as cost effective as you are. For somebody who's actually going to enter into a job market, there is actually the need to be aware that sometimes the things that you actually compare that's like that you competing with is actually also the things that's actually a machine to a certain extent. So I think in that sense, there's in the current space, I don't think there is a firm a firm point of view, because I think there are actually certain conversations that we do need to have when it comes to rights, for instance, that actually hasn't actually occurred when it comes to some of these spaces. But I think trying to actually find like where there are advantages to the human or to the person would actually be like for creativity, for empathy, those type of things would actually be quite fundamental, I think, as you actually go on in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. And it almost comes to an end. And thank you so much, both speakers, for sharing your insights. Thank you so much, Prof. IR, Dr. Chee Seng, and also
My
Miss
pleasure.
Farlina, for having the discussions with us today. And I believe it is very insightful for all the participants. And thank you so much. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting us, and thank you very much for stay with us for the last 2 hours, isn't it, Farlina?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for the questions as well.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See you.